The spring sun cast long shadows across the loading dock as Luke Carter surveyed the massive steam engine being unloaded from the riverboat. After 3 years of development in Chicago, his automated cattle feeding system was finally arriving in Pueblo. The gleaming brass and iron contraption represented everything he'd worked for, a way to revolutionize ranching along the Arkansas River. But the suspicious glares from the dock workers told him that bringing modern innovation to cattle country wouldn't be easy. Behind him, his sister Caroline fanned herself in the afternoon heat, her practical riding dress and sun-weathered face marking her as more rancher than society lady. "Luke, are you certain about this? Father left us a perfectly good ranch running things the traditional way. This machine of yours." She trailed off, watching the complex system of gears and pipes being carefully lowered to the wooden planks. "The old ways won't sustain us forever, especially with the droughts getting worse each year," Luke replied, running a hand through his dark hair. "This automated feed mill can process grain 4 times faster than manual labor. Combined with the new cattle breeds I've developed, we could double production while using half the water." His voice carried the quiet conviction of a man who'd staked everything on progress. The Hall brothers watched from across the street, tobacco juice staining their beards as they spat into the dust. Nathan and Joshua Hall had run cattle in the valley for 20 years, their methods as ancient as the Spanish missions that dotted the landscape. To them, Luke's machines were an affront to tradition and a threat to their own interest in keeping smaller ranchers dependent on their larger operation. "Looks like old man Carter's boy finally lost his mind," Nathan drawled, adjusting the worn pistol on his hip. "Bringing city nonsense out here where it don't belong." Joshua merely nodded, his cold eyes following Luke's every move. The Hall brothers had fought hard to maintain their power over local ranching, and they weren't about to let some young inventor upset their carefully controlled system. Eleanor Nelson, the local banker's daughter, pushed through the growing crowd to stand beside Caroline. Though Eleanor's father had approved the loans for Luke's project, she carried her own doubts. "It's not just the machine they're worried about," she whispered. "The new cattle breeds you're importing, they say they're unnatural, that they'll bring disease or worse." Her words carried genuine concern rather than judgment. Luke knew the rumors circulating about his experimental crossbreeding program, but the drought-resistant traits he'd developed could save ranches across the territory. If only he could make them understand that innovation didn't mean destroying tradition. It meant giving that tradition a future. The setting sun glinted off his machine's brass fittings as workers began assembling it on the dock. Isaac Lopez, Luke's foreman and oldest friend, appeared at his shoulder. "The hands are nervous, Jefe," he said quietly. "Some are talking about quitting rather than work with the machine. And I've heard whispers that the Hall brothers are offering bonus wages to anyone who leaves us." Isaac's loyalty was unwavering, but his pragmatic nature saw the challenges ahead. A commotion at the far end of the dock drew their attention. Joshua Hall was arguing with one of the riverboat crew, his voice carrying across the wooden planks. "You bring more of these contraptions upriver, you'll find yourself without a place to dock. We take care of our own here." The threat was clear, and several dock workers nodded in agreement. Caroline gripped Luke's arm. "Maybe we should start smaller. Just the new cattle for now. Delay the machinery." But Luke shook his head. The drought was worsening, and traditional methods were failing. The future of ranching itself was at stake. He'd mortgaged everything they had on this gamble. There was no turning back now. The sun sank behind the mountains as workers continued assembling his dream, piece by precious piece. The next morning dawned clear and cold as Luke supervised the machine's installation at the Carter Ranch. The sprawling property had been in their family for 3 generations, its adobe buildings and corrals a testament to their father's hard work. Now modern pipes and steam vents rose alongside traditional structures, a jarring contrast that made even Luke pause. Eleanor rode out mid-morning, her horse picking its way through the construction. "Father wanted me to check on the investment," she said, but her eyes held more than professional interest as she watched Luke direct the workers. They'd grown up together, and she understood his drive to innovate better than most. But she also knew the risks he was taking, with his inheritance, his reputation, and perhaps his life. The new cattle arrived that afternoon, sleek, powerful animals that barely resembled the traditional longhorns. Luke had spent years developing this breed, combining the hardiness of Texas stock with the meat quality of European varieties. They moved with surprising grace into the holding pens, But the ranch hands kept their distance, muttering prayers and making signs against evil. Isaac organized the nervous cowboys while Luke explained the automated feeding system. The machine would grind and mix precise feed ratios, delivering nutrition tailored to each animal's needs through a network of pipes. It was brilliant engineering, but to men who'd spent their lives judging feed by sight and touch, it seemed like sorcery. 3 hands quit on the spot, heading straight for the Hall brothers' ranch. As the sun set on that first day, Luke stood with Caroline on their father's favorite ridge overlooking the valley. The steam engine's rhythmic chugging echoed across the land, so different from the evening sounds of their childhood. "I know you think I'm crazy," he said softly, "but everything changes. We have to change with it, or we'll lose it all." Caroline squeezed his hand, her silence both support and worry. That night, Luke worked late in the barn, making final adjustments to the feed mixers. The flame of his lantern cast dancing shadows on the walls, and for a moment he thought he saw movement in the darkness beyond. But when he looked up, there was only the quiet night and his gleaming machine, waiting to prove itself in a land where change came slow and trust came slower. The next morning brought more than just dawn to the valley. 3 riders approached from the direction of Pueblo, their horses kicking up dust along the trading road that followed the river's gentle curve. Luke recognized Nathan Hall's distinctive white stallion leading the group, and his stomach tightened. The Hall brothers weren't known for social calls, especially not at first light. Caroline spotted them from the kitchen window and hurried out to the barn, where Luke was already starting the steam engine's morning warm-up sequence. "They're coming to make trouble," she warned, her voice tight with concern. "Joshua Hall was in town yesterday, telling everyone your machines would drive cattle prices so low we'd all starve by winter." Luke continued his work, checking pressure gauges and adjusting valves with practiced precision. The brass fittings gleamed in the early light, a stark contrast to the weathered wood of the old barn. "They're scared, Caroline. Change always scares people who profit from keeping things exactly as they are." The Hall brothers dismounted at the fence line, their spurs jingling ominously in the morning quiet. Nathan, the eldest, carried himself with the rigid authority of a man used to being obeyed. Behind him, Joshua and Caleb spread out slightly, a habit from their days running security on cattle drives. "Morning, Prescott," Nathan called out, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a rattler's warning. "Quite a contraption you've got here. Heard it all the way from the south pasture yesterday." He walked closer, boots crunching on the gravel. "Some folks are saying you're fixing to put every traditional rancher out of business with these city ideas." Luke wiped his hands on a cloth and stepped forward, positioning himself between the machine and the visitors. The steam engine continued its steady rhythm behind him, like a heartbeat in the tense air. "Innovation doesn't have to mean destruction, Nathan. I'm trying to help all of us survive what's coming." "And what exactly is coming?" Joshua cut in, his hand resting too casually near his holster. "Seems to me things have worked fine for generations without all this. Machinery." The way he spat the last word made it sound like a curse. Before Luke could respond, Eleanor, the youngest Hall sister, rode up on her bay mare. She hadn't been with her brothers initially, and her unexpected arrival shifted the tension. "Nathan," she called out sharply, "the Tucson buyers are early. They're waiting at the trading post." The interruption seemed to cool the immediate confrontation, but Nathan's parting words carried a clear threat. "Think hard about what you're doing, Prescott. Some changes can't be undone." The brothers mounted up, but Eleanor lingered behind, waiting until they were out of earshot. "Luke," she said quietly, "there's talk in Durango about cattle thieves moving north along the river. They're targeting progressive ranches, places with new methods." Her eyes darted to the steam engine. "Be careful, not everyone sees progress the same way you do." After they'd all ridden away, Caroline emerged from the barn's shadow. "She's sweet on you," she observed, trying to lighten the mood. But Luke barely heard her, his mind already racing through calculations and contingencies. The machine's success wasn't just about proving his ideas anymore, it was about survival. That afternoon, Luke rode out to check the experimental breeding pastures where his new cattle strains grazed. The crossbreeds were showing promise, their sturdy frames and thick coats better suited to the changing climate than the traditional longhorns. As he crested the hill, he saw smoke rising from the direction of the river trading post. Something wasn't right. The trading post never lit their big fires until evening. He spurred his horse toward the smoke, the weight of his father's old rifle suddenly very present against his saddle. The future he envisioned wasn't just about machines and breeding programs. It was about finding a way forward that honored the past while embracing the new. But with each passing day, it seemed the path between those two worlds grew narrower and more dangerous. The spring cattle drive had brought more than just new herds to Durango. It delivered Luke Carter's revolutionary ideas straight to the heart of ranching country. His mechanized feed mixers and automated irrigation systems gleamed in the morning sun, like alien artifacts among the weathered wooden structures of the trading post. Local ranchers gathered in suspicious clusters, muttering about how no self-respecting cattleman would trust machines over tradition. Nathan Hall leaned against the general store's support beam, watching Luke demonstrate his latest invention. A mechanical hay baler that could do the work of 10 men. Technology ain't natural, Nathan declared loudly enough for others to hear. Them fancy contraptions'll break down faster than a green Mustang. But beneath his bluster, Nathan worried how Luke's innovations might impact his own sprawling ranch along the Animas River. Caroline Lopez, the town's most prosperous merchant, saw opportunity where others saw threat. Her trading post supplied goods to ranches for 50 miles in every direction, and Luke's modern methods could revolutionize the cattle business. She approached him after the demonstration, her practical mind already calculating potential profits. "Mr. Carter, perhaps we should discuss how my establishment might help distribute your innovations." The gathering crowd dispersed, leaving Luke to pack up his equipment. He noticed Eleanor Allen lingering nearby, daughter of the region's largest rancher. Unlike the others, curiosity rather than condemnation shone in her eyes. "How does it determine the proper mixture for different types of cattle?" she asked, gesturing to the feed mixer. Luke smiled, pleased to find someone genuinely interested in understanding rather than dismissing his work. Joshua Nelson watched the exchange from the shadows of the livery stable, his weathered face darkening. As leader of the local Cattlemen's Association, he'd built his reputation on traditional ranching methods. These machines threatened everything he'd worked for. He needed to find a way to discredit Carter and his newfangled ideas before they took root. The stranger had to go, one way or another. That evening at the Durango Saloon, Joshua gathered his most trusted allies. "Carter's got people thinking machines can replace good, honest work," he growled. "Won't be long before he's undercutting all our operations with his factory farming." Isaac Allen, Eleanor's brother, shifted uncomfortably. He'd seen firsthand how the new methods increased efficiency, but family loyalty kept him silent. Luke's introduction of hardy Brahman cross cattle sparked even more controversy. The distinctive humped backs and heat-resistant hides marked them as different from the traditional Herefords and Angus that dominated local herds. Caleb Hall, Nathan's youngest son, marveled at how the exotic breeds thrived in the harsh Colorado climate. His father caught him studying Luke's detailed breeding records and dealt him a sharp cuff across the ear. Charlotte Nelson, Joshua's wife, observed the growing tension with mounting concern. 20 years of marriage had taught her to read the signs of approaching violence in her husband's rigid posture and clenched jaw. She'd seen too many range wars start over less. That night, she penned a careful warning to her friend Rose Carter, Luke's mother, urging her to counsel patience in her ambitious son. The situation reached a breaking point when several of Luke's experimental cattle were found dead, their water source deliberately contaminated. Caroline Lopez discovered Luke examining the poisoned spring, his face set in grim lines. "They think they can scare me off," he said without turning. "But these methods work. The future's coming whether they like it or not." Caroline touched his arm sympathetically, though she worried his determination might get him killed. Eleanor Allen's regular visits to Luke's demonstration farm raised eyebrows throughout the community. Her father, Caleb Allen, confronted her one evening. "You're being foolish, girl. That man's bringing nothing but trouble." Eleanor stood her ground. "His ideas could save ranches like ours when the next drought hits. Why can't you see that?" The argument ended with slammed doors and stony silence. The sabotage escalated. Luke's mechanical hay baler was found smashed beyond repair, and threatening notes appeared nailed to his door. Joshua Nelson's men grew bolder, openly harassing anyone who showed interest in the new methods. But they hadn't counted on Caroline Lopez's influence. Her trading post was the lifeblood of the region, and she began requiring ranchers to attend educational demonstrations about modern techniques before extending them credit. Luke found an unexpected ally in Isaac Allen, who'd been secretly implementing some of the new methods on a remote section of his family's ranch. The improved results were undeniable. When his father discovered the experiment, the ensuing argument split the Allen family down the middle. Eleanor sided with her brother, while their father threatened to disinherit them both. The town divided into factions as summer wore on. Traditional ranchers boycotted Caroline's trading post, forcing her to send urgent messages to her suppliers in Pueblo and Wichita for additional inventory. Luke's supporters faced social ostracism and economic pressure, but his proven results gradually won over more converts. The future was arriving in Durango, one innovation at a time, despite the old guard's desperate resistance. The first signs of sabotage appeared gradually. Luke discovered cut fences and damaged irrigation equipment, but initially dismissed them as accidents. When his experimental breeding records vanished from the barn office, however, the pattern became clear. Someone was systematically undermining his modernization efforts, and the precision of the attack suggested inside knowledge of his operation. Caroline noticed strangers lingering around her trading post, rough men who asked too many questions about Luke's supply shipments. She began varying delivery schedules and routes, working with trusted freighters who shared her concerns about the mounting tensions. The night her warehouse was broken into, she slept in her office with a shotgun across her lap, determined to protect the lifeline that kept progressive ranchers in business. Isaac and Eleanor Allen's decision to publicly support Luke's methods triggered an exodus of longtime hands from their family ranch. Their father, consumed by pride and tradition, refused to acknowledge the improved cattle weights and breeding success rates his children achieved. The rift deepened when Eleanor discovered their father had been meeting secretly with Joshua Parker, a notorious cattle broker known for dealing in questionable livestock. Luke's innovative crossbreeding program produced its first major success, a hardy new strain that combined the meat quality of Herefords with the heat tolerance of Longhorns. But during a crucial demonstration for potential investors, someone stampeded the demonstration herd. Only quick thinking by Eleanor, who had been raised in the saddle, prevented catastrophic losses. The saboteurs left behind a warning: progress ain't welcome here. The drought that hit that August tested everyone's resolve. Traditional ranchers watched their cattle struggle on depleted grasslands, while Luke's innovative irrigation systems and drought-resistant feed crops helped his herds maintain condition. Caroline extended credit to desperate ranchers, but only if they agreed to attend classes on sustainable grazing methods. Resentment simmered beneath a veneer of desperate cooperation. Rose, the young telegraph operator, became an unexpected source of intelligence. She noticed encrypted messages passing between Joshua Parker and cattle buyers in Wichita, hinting at plans to undermine the modernizers. When she shared her suspicions with Caroline, the two women began documenting the pattern of sabotage, building a case for the territorial authorities. Luke found allies among the younger generation of ranchers, who saw the writing on the wall. Caleb Thompson, fresh from agricultural college in Pueblo, brought new ideas about crop rotation and soil conservation. Together, they established a demonstration farm where traditional ranchers could witness the benefits of modern methods firsthand. Some came at night, ashamed to be seen learning new ways. The situation reached a crisis point when Isaac discovered proof that cattle rustlers were using the confusion and division to increase their activities. Traditional ranchers blamed Luke's innovations for disrupting the old order, while progressive ranchers argued that resistance to change had created vulnerabilities the thieves exploited. The community teetered on the edge of open conflict. Eleanor's diplomatic skills proved crucial in maintaining fragile lines of communication between the factions. She organized weekly suppers where ranchers from both camps could talk without pressure, letting the results speak for themselves. Slowly, even some of the old guard began to admit that selective adoption of new methods might be necessary for survival. As autumn approached, Luke and his allies prepared for a decisive confrontation. They knew the rustlers would make their move before winter set in, and the traditional ranchers would have to choose sides. Caroline stockpiled supplies, Rose monitored telegraph traffic, and Eleanor worked to heal the breach with her father. The future of ranching in Durango hung in the balance, as tradition and progress clashed under the Colorado sky. The summer sun blazed mercilessly over the Pueblo riverfront as Luke Allen stood before the smoldering ruins of his experimental cattle barn. 6 months of careful breeding records and his prized Hereford Longhorn crossbreeds were gone, destroyed in what the sheriff had dismissively called an unfortunate accident. But Luke knew better. The charred remains of a kerosene lamp, strategically placed beneath the hay storage, told a different story. His innovative breeding program had threatened the wrong people, and now they had struck back with devastating efficiency. Caroline Nelson clutched Luke's arm as they surveyed the destruction. As the daughter of Pueblo's most prominent merchant family, she had defied her father's wishes by supporting Luke's revolutionary ranching methods. Their engagement had only intensified the opposition from both families. "We'll rebuild," she whispered, but Luke barely heard her through the roaring in his ears as he spotted Nathan Carter's distinctive, silver-trimmed hat bobbing through the gathered onlookers. The Carter family had dominated the regional cattle trade for 3 generations, controlling the prime grazing lands along the Arkansas River and the lucrative contracts with the railroad companies. Nathan Carter's father, Joshua, had built an empire through traditional open-range ranching, and Nathan viewed Luke's selective breeding and fenced pastures as a direct threat to their way of life. The younger Carter's cold smile as he surveyed the ruins spoke volumes about his involvement. Eleanor Hall, the town's most respected schoolteacher and Caroline's closest friend, pushed through the crowd with a leather-bound ledger clutched to her chest. "I saved your breeding records," she gasped. "I was grading papers late last night when I saw them riding toward the barn. I slipped in through the back and grabbed what I could." Luke's heart leapt. With those records, he could rebuild his program. But Eleanor's next words froze his blood. "Luke, they're planning something bigger. I overheard them talking about the dam." The massive irrigation dam upstream of Pueblo was Luke's most ambitious project yet. By controlling water flow to the valley's pastures, his system would revolutionize cattle raising in the territory. But in the wrong hands, the dam could also be used to flood out smaller ranchers or starve their herds of water. The Carter family had opposed its construction from the start, and now Luke understood why. The barn was just a warning shot. The dam was their real target. Isaac Lopez, Luke's foreman and closest friend, appeared at his shoulder with a Winchester rifle. "3 riders headed north along the river trail," he reported quietly. "I recognized Caleb Carter's paint horse." Nathan's younger brother had always been the family's enforcer, more comfortable with violence than negotiations. If he was moving toward the dam, they had precious little time to act. Luke's mind raced through the possibilities, each worse than the last. Charlotte Allen, Luke's widowed mother, emerged from the crowd leading his saddled stallion. Her face was lined with worry, but her voice was steel. "Your father didn't build this ranch by backing down from bullies," she said, pressing the reins into his hand. "But he also knew the value of thinking before acting." She glanced meaningfully at Caroline, who stood pale but determined beside Eleanor. "Whatever you decide, remember you're not just fighting for yourself anymore." The next hours unfolded like a fever dream. Luke and Isaac rode hard for the dam, taking the treacherous River Canyon Trail, while Rose Carter, Nathan's rebellious young sister who had secretly supported Luke's innovations, led a larger group along the main road to cut off any reinforcements. The fate of the valley's future hung by a thread, and Luke knew that before the sun set, blood would be spilled one way or another. The confrontation at the dam became the stuff of local legend. Caleb Carter and his men had rigged explosives to the main spillway, intending to destroy not just Luke's irrigation system, but the water security of every small ranch in the valley. The ensuing gunfight echoed off the canyon walls as Luke and Isaac fought to reach the detonator. Rose Carter's intervention proved decisive. She had brought not just armed allies but also irrefutable evidence of her brother's crimes. In the aftermath, as the sun set over the Arkansas River, the old order crumbled like the walls of Luke's burned barn. Nathan and Caleb Carter fled toward Durango, their empire in shambles. Joshua Carter, broken by his son's actions, signed over controlling interest in the family's water rights to a cooperative of small ranchers. And Luke stood with Caroline beside the dam that would change everything, watching the future flow past like the endless river below. The next morning dawned with an eerie quiet over the valley, as news of the Carter brothers' flight spread through the scattered homesteads. Luke found himself standing in the ruins of his experimental breeding pens, salvaging what remained of his detailed genealogy records. The morning frost had left delicate patterns on the charred timbers, a reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything. Caroline worked beside him, her determined silence speaking volumes about the weight of recent events. Isaac arrived shortly after sunrise, leading a string of horses and carrying word from the telegraph office in Pueblo. Nathan and Caleb had been spotted crossing into New Mexico territory, but a posse out of Durango was already on their trail. More importantly, the railroad company had expressed renewed interest in Luke's breeding program, seeing the potential for hardier cattle that could better survive the long journey north. Eleanor, the town's schoolteacher who had supported Luke's modernization efforts from the start, organized a meeting at the schoolhouse to discuss the valley's future. The small ranchers who had once viewed Luke's innovations with suspicion now crowded around his diagrams of irrigation systems and breeding charts. Joshua Carter sat in the back, his proud bearing diminished but his eyes showing a glimmer of hope as Luke explained how selective breeding could strengthen their collective herds. Rose Carter's testimony had shaken the valley's power structure to its core. She shared documents revealing how her brothers had systematically undermined smaller ranchers, manipulating water rights and orchestrating mysterious cattle deaths. The evidence stretched back years, painting a picture of calculated cruelty that had masked itself as tradition. Her courage in coming forward had earned her both admiration and isolation. The weight of betraying family, even in service of justice, hung heavy. The cooperative formed in the wake of the confrontation began to take shape under Caroline's steady guidance. Her experience managing her father's books in Wichita proved invaluable as they structured agreements between former rivals. Luke's innovative methods were integrated gradually, respecting the wisdom of generations while embracing necessary change. The first shared herd of selectively bred cattle became a symbol of their new unity. Charlotte, the widow who ran the general store, reported increased traffic as word spread of the valley's transformation. Ranchers from as far as Tucson came to observe Luke's methods, bringing with them news of similar conflicts playing out across the territories. The struggle between progress and tradition wasn't unique to their valley. It was reshaping the entire West. Josephine, who had lost her husband in one of the accidents orchestrated by the Carter brothers, found purpose in managing the cooperative's new veterinary station. Her knowledge of traditional remedies complemented Luke's scientific approach, creating a hybrid methodology that proved more effective than either system alone. The station became a gathering place where old wisdom and new learning flowed together like the confluence of rivers. As summer approached, the valley showed signs of healing. New grass grew over the scars left by sabotage and struggle. The irrigation system, now properly maintained by the cooperative, transformed once marginal land into productive pasture. Luke's experimental breeds thrived, their strength and resilience a testament to the power of thoughtful innovation. But the greatest change was in the community itself. Former enemies worked side by side, sharing knowledge and resources in ways that would have seemed impossible months before. One evening, as Luke and Caroline walked along the river that had nearly torn their world apart, they discovered fresh tracks leading north. The distinctive prints of Nathan's horse suggested the brothers hadn't given up their claim to the valley. Caroline's hand tightened on Luke's arm, but there was no fear in her expression, only determination. They had fought too hard and sacrificed too much to let the shadow of the past darken their future. The valley's transformation had only begun, and its people would face whatever came together, stronger for having been tested by fire and water. The gathering storm clouds mirrored the tension building in the valley as Luke and Caroline rushed back to warn the cooperative members about Nathan's return. The timing couldn't have been worse. Their new breeding program was reaching a crucial phase, with the first generation of hybrid cattle ready for market, and the irrigation systems were finally operating at full capacity. Word spread quickly through the network of ranches, and by nightfall, riders were patrolling the boundaries of their shared lands. Eleanor, who had become the cooperative's record keeper, organized an emergency meeting in the old trading post near the river bend. The weathered building, once a simple waypoint between Pueblo and Durango, now served as the heart of their community. Maps covered the walls, marking the innovative grazing rotations and water management systems that had transformed the valley. As ranchers filed in, their faces bore the same mix of concern and resolve that had carried them through previous challenges. Joshua, who had emerged as one of Luke's strongest supporters, brought news from his scouts along the northern ridge. The autumn morning brought a chill wind down from the mountains as Luke Allen surveyed the wreckage of his experimental cattle pens along the Arkansas River. 6 months of innovative work lay scattered across the muddy ground, the reinforced fencing torn apart and his prized Hereford Longhorn crossbreeds scattered. His brother Nathan stood beside him, jaw clenched in barely contained fury as they took in the destruction that had occurred overnight. This was no accident. Nathan growled, kneeling to examine the clean cuts in the metal cables that had anchored the fence posts. Carter's men did this. They've been looking for any excuse to shut us down since we started bringing in the new breeds. Luke nodded grimly, knowing his brother was right. Joshua Carter and his traditional ranching family had opposed the Allen brothers' modernization efforts from the start. Caroline Lopez, their chief veterinarian and animal genetics expert, emerged from the nearby barn with a leather satchel of medical supplies. 3 of the new calves are injured, but they'll survive. We lost 2 of the breeding bulls, though. They were deliberately shot. Her voice was tight with anger as she described finding the valuable animals dead in the far pasture. The loss of those carefully bred bulls would set their program back months. Eleanor Hall, Luke's fiancée and daughter of the local banker in Pueblo, arrived on horseback with urgent news. Joshua Carter is gathering men in town. He's claiming your unnatural breeding programs are bringing disease to the valley. He's whipping up the other ranchers against you. Her green eyes flashed with determination. My father still supports you, but Carter's influence runs deep with the old families. The situation had been building to this confrontation for over a year, ever since Luke returned from agricultural college back east, with radical new ideas about selective breeding, automated feeding systems, and scientific ranch management. His father's death had left the brothers in charge of the Allen Ranch, and Luke was determined to drag it into the modern age, no matter how much resistance they faced from neighboring ranchers. Nathan organized their ranch hands to round up the scattered cattle while Luke and Caroline documented the damage for the sheriff. But they all knew local law enforcement was firmly in Carter's pocket. Any investigation would go nowhere. They needed another solution, one that would prove the value of their methods to the entire community before Carter's faction could destroy everything they'd built. The answer came from an unexpected source. Josephine Nelson, the widowed owner of the River Trading Post, arrived with a proposal. The Army garrison at Fort Lyon needs reliable beef suppliers for the winter. Their usual contractors can't meet the quota. If you can demonstrate your breeding program produces more meat per head, you could win the entire contract. Her practical suggestion offered a path forward that might save their operation. Luke gathered his allies for a council of war in the ranch house that evening. Caroline's scientific expertise, Eleanor's financial connections through her father, Josephine's trading network, and Nathan's strategic mind all offered pieces of the solution. They would need to accelerate their breeding program while protecting their remaining stock from Carter's saboteurs. It would take round-the-clock vigilance and careful coordination. Over the next weeks, they fortified the ranch like a military compound. Caleb Lopez, Caroline's brother and an Army veteran, trained the ranch hands in defensive tactics. Charlotte Carter, Joshua's estranged daughter, who had secretly supported Luke's innovations, began feeding them intelligence about her father's planned attacks. The ranch became an armed camp as they raced to prepare their cattle for the Army's inspection. Joshua Carter made his move the night before the Army purchasing officers were due to arrive. His men attacked from multiple directions, hoping to scatter the hybrid cattle herd into the wilderness. But Luke's defenders were ready. The ensuing firefight lit up the river valley as shots echoed off the canyon walls. Nathan led the defense of the main corrals while Luke and Caroline worked to protect their precious breeding records and genetic charts. In the chaos, Carter himself slipped into the ranch office, planning to destroy the documentation that proved the superiority of the new breeding program. But he found Eleanor waiting for him, her father's ledgers spread across the desk. The banking records showed how Carter had been embezzling from the Regional Cattlemen's Association for years, using the money to maintain his grip on local ranchers through loans and threats. The arrival of the Army patrol at dawn brought the violence to an abrupt halt. Captain Isaac Hall, Eleanor's brother, had ridden ahead of the main procurement team after receiving her urgent message. His troops quickly restored order, arresting Carter and his core followers. The evidence of Carter's financial crimes and attempted sabotage would ensure he spent years in prison, his influence finally broken. In the aftermath, Luke's innovative breeding programs gained wider acceptance throughout the Arkansas River Valley. The Army contract provided proof that his scientific methods could produce better cattle more efficiently. Other ranchers began adopting his techniques, and the Allen Ranch became a center for agricultural education. The old guard's resistance to change gradually faded as the benefits became clear. Caroline and Luke established the region's first veterinary college in Pueblo, while Nathan expanded their trading operations along the river with Josephine's help. Eleanor's banking expertise helped finance other forward-thinking ranchers. The Carter Ranch, under Charlotte's new leadership, became their strongest ally in promoting modern ranching methods. The family legacy they protected wasn't just about land and cattle, it was about building a better future for the entire community. Rose Allen, Luke and Eleanor's daughter, grew up watching the ranch evolve into a thriving center of innovation. The story of how her family had fought to bring positive change to the frontier became legend in the valley. The rivers that had once divided the community now connected a network of prosperous ranches, all built on the foundation of progress her father had dared to imagine. The future they had fought for became a reality that would shape generations to come. The legacy of innovation continued to shape the valley as the years passed. Rose Allen, now a young woman herself, took particular interest in expanding her father Luke's work with selective breeding. She spent countless hours in the newly established veterinary laboratories in Pueblo, working alongside Caroline to develop hardier cattle breeds that could thrive in the harsh western climate while producing superior meat and milk yields. Her dedication to advancing her father's vision earned her respect even among the old guard ranchers who had once opposed change. Nathan and Josephine's trading network along the river evolved into a sophisticated operation that connected ranchers from Tucson to Durango. They established regular steamboat routes that not only transported cattle, but also served as floating marketplaces where ranchers could exchange knowledge and techniques. The waterways that had once divided territories became channels of cooperation and shared prosperity, with their main office in Wichita serving as a hub for the entire region. Eleanor's banking initiatives grew into a formal agricultural lending institution, providing crucial support for ranchers willing to adopt sustainable practices and modern methods. She worked closely with Charlotte Carter to develop financial programs specifically designed to help smaller ranches transition to new techniques without risking their livelihoods. Their partnership became a model for how traditional ranching families could embrace progress while preserving their core values. The veterinary college that Caroline had helped establish became renowned throughout the territory. Students came from as far as California to study the innovative techniques being developed there. The curriculum combined traditional ranching wisdom with cutting-edge scientific knowledge, creating a new generation of veterinarians who understood both the practical and theoretical aspects of cattle management. Luke often gave guest lectures, sharing his experiences of overcoming resistance to change. As Rose matured into leadership, she faced new challenges. Climate patterns were shifting, making water management increasingly critical. She spearheaded efforts to implement advanced irrigation systems that conserved water while maximizing grazing land productivity. Her work caught the attention of agricultural societies back east, who sent representatives to study the methods being pioneered in the valley. The story of the Allen family's transformation of ranching practices became required reading at agricultural schools across the country. What had begun as one man's vision had grown into a movement that was reshaping the entire industry. Yet Rose never forgot the human cost of that progress. The conflicts, the sacrifices, and the hard-won trust of their neighbors that had made it all possible. Josephine's river trading expertise proved invaluable when drought struck the region. Her network of connections allowed them to coordinate emergency feed shipments and cattle movements, preventing the devastating losses that had once been inevitable during dry years. The system of mutual support she had helped build proved that innovation wasn't just about new machines and methods. It was about creating stronger communities. Charlotte Carter's ranch became a testing ground for the latest advances. She worked closely with Rose to implement new breeding programs that produced cattle particularly well suited to the local environment. Their success inspired other ranchers to follow suit, creating a ripple effect that gradually transformed the region's herds into some of the finest in the territory. Eleanor's financial acumen helped weather economic downturns that might have otherwise devastated the ranching community. By diversifying investments and creating cooperative arrangements between ranches, she built a resilient economic foundation that protected them all. The banking system she developed became a model studied by agricultural communities throughout the West. As Rose looked out over the valley from her father's favorite ridge, she could see how completely the landscape had changed. Modern windmills dotted the horizon, pumping life-giving water to carefully managed pastures. The river carried steamboats laden with healthy cattle bound for markets near and far. Yet the essential character of the land remained. Wild and beautiful, but now working in harmony with human innovation rather than against it. The future Rose envisioned went beyond even her father's dreams. She saw possibilities in new technologies emerging from the East. Telephones that could connect distant ranches, machines that could help with the hardest physical labor, better ways to preserve and transport meat. But she never forgot the lessons of the past. That true progress came not from forcing change, but from helping people see its benefits for themselves.